Every single day, we were reminded of the oligarchs that run this country. Today, we saw not one, but two examples of this. First was Donald Trump's top campaign donor, Elon Musk, in the White House during Trump's first cabinet meeting of his second term. Musk is not part of the cabinet. He shouldn't be there. He certainly shouldn't get a prime speaking spot. In fact, the Trump administration is now saying Musk doesn't head DOGE or the Dodgy group. It's headed by someone named Amy Gleason, who we never heard of. I think Amy Gleason might be Elon Musk's drag queen name. So maybe they're the same person. Like George Santos had a drag queen name. I think this is Elon Musk's drag queen name, Amy Gleason. It's him. It's Kaiser Sose. But there was Musk today, the wealthiest person in the world. Yes, the wealthiest person in the world, holding court, telling the Senate-confirmed members of the cabinet what they need to cut from their budget. This is what a plutocracy looks like. This is a government by the wealthy, for the wealthy. And surrounding him at the meeting were other billionaires. There has been no cabinet that has many billionaires as Donald Trump's does. Now, of course, the cuts Trump is calling for and Elon Musk are calling for, none of them include the nearly $40 billion in government contracts that Musk has benefited by. The Washington Post reported today went through the last few years, $40 billion. Last year alone, nearly $7 billion we know of. Some could be classified, it could be higher. But Elon Musk wants to gut the workforce, gut programs that help people, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all to give a massive tax cut for himself and his fellow oligarchs. But Elon Musk was not the only obscenely wealthy person today working the system to make even more money. Today we saw Jeff Bezos do that. Jeff Bezos, who's currently the second wealthiest man in the world. So Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, Jeff Bezos, the second richest. And what is he doing? He's taking a page from Musk, who uses Twitter as a platform to help him. Well, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and he now wants to use the Washington Post unabashedly the same way Elon Musk uses Twitter, and that's to help his own personal agenda. Bezos announced today that the Washington Post, the editorial section, would be going in a new direction. As you might imagine, that new direction is not anti-Trump, especially given that during the campaign, Bezos blocked the endorsement by the Washington Post of Vice President Harris. No, Bezos announced that the new focus of the famed Washington Post will be pro-oligarchy. Of course, he didn't use the term oligarchy, but I will break down exactly what he had in his statement. And it's pro-oligarchy. They're not hiding it. Bezos' memo began, it was released to the public, "I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages." Then he revealed the new mandate. "We are going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets." You get that? Personal liberties and free markets. He goes, "We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to published by others." So you got to write for the op-ed section, if you're going to write about personal liberties or free markets, it's got to be all the point of view that Jeff Bezos wants. The second wealthiest man in the world wants op-eds on the paper he owns to do this. Now, he goes on in the statement noting that the editor of the editorial page has quit in protest, and he wishes him well. And then he has his little, Jeff Bezos then goes on his little soapbox. "Our country did not get here by being typical, and a big part of America's success has been freedom in the economic realm and everywhere else. Freedom is ethical. It minimizes coercion and practical. It drives creativity, invention, and prosperity." And he concludes, "I'm confident that free markets and personal liberties are right for America. I also believe these viewpoints are underserved in the current market of ideas and news opinion. I'm excited for us together to fill that void." Let's go back and break this down. First, there is Bezos' passage. "A big part of America's success has been freedom in the economic realm." Just so it's clear, he's saying freedom in the economic realm, not freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom in the economic world. And then he says this, "Freedom is ethical." It minimizes coercion. And practical. Freedom drives creativity, invention, and prosperity. And the way he wrote that, freedom is ethical, like freedom is good, it reminded me of the famous monologue from the movie Wall Street, where Gordon Gekko, played by Michael Douglas, delivered a speech along those same lines. But instead of freedom, he used the actual word Bezos is getting at. And that word is greed. And here is that famous part from the movie. Let's hear clip number 4 we'll go down to.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
That's what Jeff Bezos was saying. That's what his statement is. When he says freedom is ethical, it minimizes coercion and practical. It's been a big part of America's success. It's no different than greed is good. It clarifies, it cuts through and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed for life, for money, for knowledge. And greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but the other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. That's what he's saying. And then we have the second mandate that Jeff Bezos wants every editorial in his paper to focus on: free market. When you hear the term free market from oligarchs and plutocrats, understand what they're saying. They're saying they want a system that will allow them to make even more money. What they are saying, just like in the first part, greed. Greed. I am greedy. I want more money. And I don't care who suffers. A free market economy, from an economic point of view, just so you know the actual definition of it, at its essence means an unregulated system in which taxes, quality controls, and other forms of centralized economic interventions by the government either do not exist or are minimal. In other words, Jeff Bezos is saying he wants his paper to be pro no taxes on the wealthy, no taxes on companies, and no regulation so he can buy up competitors and have a monopoly. You see, monopolies are great for the wealthy, but bad for us because no competition, so they can raise the prices. As economists warn, in free market economy, companies with a high market share will be able to set higher prices for consumers. Of course, and that's what he wants. He's not hiding what he wants. Free market means more money. And while it is true, if people study economies and you look at free market economies, there are some upsides. Economists will talk about it. But it really depends on the economy you're in and what traits are defining your economic situation. And you know when a free market is really not good, where economists have written papers on this, when you have excessive income inequality. Free market is not good when you already have excessive income inequality. Free market tends to make income inequality even worse. It tends to make the rich richer, more of a concentration of wealth, and less opportunity for everyone who's not wealthy. That's why it's especially not good for us right now. We need a progressive tax code to mandate that the wealthy pay their fair share finally in this country. But instead, they want to pay Jeff Bezos no taxes. So he has more money to acquire more assets. The rich get richer while the rest of us struggle to stay afloat. This is the world we live in. We need government to level the playing field, to help small businesses, to provide a social safety net like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. But Bezos and Elon Musk, and it ties into exactly what he was saying today, and the oligarchs want to end that because to them it's a waste of money. Having 2 million people work for the federal government is a waste of money. Having A Medicare program, Social Security, Medicaid, these are a waste of money. They believe in survival of the fittest. They believe that in the corporate world, in the real world. It's like eugenics. It's a winnowing out of the weak. That's what they want because that's the world they come from. The weak get crushed and die. The strong get stronger and wealthier. What is missing in all of the conversation right now is this illusion that we have a very solid economy from top to bottom. We don't. We have a very precarious economy. It is not as solid as people think. And I'm going to give you data to back that up. It's not me saying this to make you feel concerned. I think people are feeling it. I've just mentioned yesterday, consumer confidence report, and last week, consumer sentiment report. Both have dropped, the biggest drop in years. People are feeling unease right now. And they get a sense of where we are. Look, one of the causes of the Great Depression, one, not the main one, but one of the main causes was income inequality. Because income inequality, where the wealthy have an inordinate amount of money, but the middle class and lower class have nothing. The middle class is just a name. That's not really a robust middle class. Well, what happens, economic instability is what defines those kind of economies. During the Gilded Age, and I've talked about the Gilded Age so many times in this show, the Gilded Age, 1880s to about 1929, you had the uber wealthy, the robber barons, the Roosevelts and Vanderbilts, Carnegies and the Mellons. Do you know how horrific income inequality was right before the stock market crashed, September 29, 1929? By that time in 1929, the top 1% of families in this country, they were responsible for and essentially owned 23.9% of all pre-tax income. So 1% of the top 1% owned about 24% of all the wealth of the country. About 60% of families at that time made less than $2,000 a year, which, to make sense of it, the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the time classified as the minimum living wage for a family of five. Uber wealthy, owning 25% of the economy, just about. 60% barely making ends meet. Stock market crash of 1929 hits, capital dries up, the economy tumbles like a house of cards. There is nothing there to hold it up. There is no robust middle class. Where are we now? Where are we now? The income gap between the rich and everyone else has grown for the last 30 years. Currently, the top 1% of our nation owns 30% of the nation's wealth. Yes, 1% owns 30% of the nation's wealth. That is worse than 1929, when the top 1% owned 23.9% of the nation's wealth. How fragile is our economy? A recent study, and this is just in the last 2 months, found nearly 60% of Americans can't afford an unexpected expense of $1,000. That's right, 60% can't afford $1,000. Worse, 37% of Americans say they can't even afford a surprise $400 expense. As one financial expert told CBS News in this recent article I read, we are essentially a paycheck-to-paycheck nation. Yes, we are a paycheck-to-paycheck nation. That's why when you lay people off and you cut services, it has an impact. What we have before us is the anatomy of a massive stock market, of a crash. Not saying we're going to get there. Crypto really concerns me a great deal. People are putting a lot of money into that. There's nothing there. Not saying want to make money, go ahead, but no, it's a huge risk. And this is deeply concerning. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, the past 3 decades have seen the America's most wealthy families add to their net worth. What about the bottom part of our nation? The rest have seen a dip into negative wealth, meaning the value of their debts exceed the value of their assets. If we have a big downturn and the government doesn't do what they did during COVID, which is give everybody thousands of dollars, our economy will collapse. And under Trump and these Republicans and Elon Musk being there, I don't think they would do that because they believe in survival of the fittest. They want the weak to leave. It is also part of fascist movements. And another similarity to the Gilded Age and today, in the Gilded Age, the oligarchs of those days, the robber barons, again, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, J. Pierpont Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, Timothy Mellon, Jay Gould, Harrimans, intensely competitive with each other, intensely competitive, always trying to outdo each other. And not just making more money, but in lavishness and spending and possessions. They talked about, it was conspicuous consumption was the term that was coined at that time for what they were about. And there's something else they had that the oligarchs of today have, and the oligarchs around the world have. Their lust for wealth is insatiable. Their lust for wealth is insatiable. Jeff Bezos, the second wealthiest person in the world, on the planet. He doesn't need to make any more money, but he wants his Washington Post to be a pro-oligarch publication. Elon Musk is literally the wealthiest person in the world. He can spend his money and do good. Instead, he wants the gut programs. He wants to usher in a white supremacist eugenics in our nation to get rid of people of color. That's how they're outdoing each other today. You know, in the time of the robber barons, historians noted they were the exploiters, not the inventors. That's how historians look at the robber barons. They were the exploiters, not the inventors. That's Elon Musk. At least Jeff Bezos created Amazon. I mean, for what it's worth, he was like a salesman and worked his way up and came up with an idea for a company at the right time, and it worked out. Elon Musk and many others are no different than others born into wealth, and then would see good ideas like he saw Tesla, invested in it, got massive contracts from the federal government. Tesla almost went under, to Washington Post reporting today. Now, in response to the Gilded Age, something really good happened. People got angry. People had enough of this lavish opulence, these massive mansions. People are scrapping around to eat like the bread, the crumbs, literally crumbs, to stay alive. And then we saw a progressive movement ushered in, beginning with Theodore Roosevelt when he takes over after McKinley is assassinated, and then much more so under FDR during the Great Depression. And through social movements and progressive policies, the income inequality gap lessened. People had more input into government. The oligarchs had less power. The United States of America was what the country we wanted to be. Look much more like that. Still needed more reforms on issues of race, of course, but in terms of wealth, the gap was small, getting smaller and smaller. Well, that changed from the 1970s through today. And now we are back to extreme levels of inequality, extreme levels of inequality, the type that make an economy unstable, a type that require Elon Musk to have bodyguards that are armed at all times. That's where we are. So in future shows, I'm going to go through a lot more in more detail about the reforms of the progressive era, so you can hear more. But obviously the rise of unions was a big part of it. Policies to deal with higher taxes on the wealthy were a big part of it. More transparency in government was part of it. But we've gone backwards as a nation. And this is one of the most fundamental areas. So my question for you is, what is your visceral reaction to having these oligarchs, literally the wealthiest man in the world who bankrolled Trump's campaign, is sitting there in a cabinet meeting? He's not in the cabinet, talking about what needs to be cut. And all the other billionaires surrounding Trump are just nodding yes because they know he's Trump's guy. This is a government by the wealthy for the wealthy. It is offensive. It is brazen. And it makes my blood boil. And what kind of reforms? I don't have to go through them. We'll go through them another day. What kind of reforms do you think will make a difference here? I mean, one of the biggest ones I've talked about is getting big money out of politics. People could be as rich as they want, as long as they pay their fair share of taxes. The biggest problem is having an inordinate impact on our politics so that our vote doesn't mean anything. So all you need are the billionaires and the oligarchs to support you, and we can't match it, and they don't care what we say. That's got to end. That is a cancer to our democracy. But what do you want to see? So let's take a break and come back and talk about this. And this really should transcend left, right. This is about, do you want to live in an oligarchy or not? Do you believe the wealthy should get wealthier at our expense or not? Or do you want a government that reforms that? And if there were any good Republicans in Congress, they could join the Democrats and change this once and for all, or at least for the foreseeable future. But I know from polling, the base of the Democratic Party and Republican Party agree on this. We all believe, I mentioned it last week, poll last week, 70% of Americans, 71% think that billionaires have too much influence on the Trump administration. If you're at 71%, that means a big chunk of Trump supporters are there with us. We got to build this coalition. We've got to change this. We've got to take our nation back. It's going to get worse. We're going to be literally serfs under the oligarchs' thumbs.